Once upon a time, there were twin brothers living on the outskirts of a little town called Chong'an, out west of Springfield, Illinois. They lived with their ma, a hard-working widow. Whenever the boys had a free moment, they'd head up into the hills to hunt. And that's where our story kicks off, out there in the wild, chasing game. Years back, when those twins came into the world, they couldn't have been more different. The older one, Tom Lucky Miller, was chubby and fair-skinned, cute as a button, folks said. The younger one, Jim Plenty Miller, was skinny and tanned, looking a little pitiful next to his brother. Now, Tom didn't mind hauling Jim along on their adventures, even though Jim was small for his age. Their pa, heartbroken over Jim's scrawny frame, would scoop him up and grumble that older boys got no sense, bullying his little brother even before they were out of the womb. Pa vowed right then and there, when they're grown, we'll set Tom straight. From that day on, Ma and Pa doted on Jim more than Tom. You could see it in everything: the extra helpings at supper, the nicer clothes, even the names they picked. Lucky for Tom sounded hopeful, sure, but plenty for Jim? That was a promise of abundance, a sign of their favoritism. Still, things don't always go the way you plan. In the blink of an eye, 16 years flew by, and both boys were grown men. No matter how much Ma and Pa spoiled Jim, he never filled out, still thin as a rail, sharp-faced and frail-looking. Tom, though? He grew up sturdy and strong, a real bull of a man. Now, here's a little side note. Tom had a quirky habit. He loved collecting pretty little stones, especially smooth pebbles about the size of a thimble. He'd stash them away like treasures. That odd little hobby of his? It nearly cost him his life one day. But it also ended up saving him, and showed him his brother's true colors in the process. Under Ma and Pa's lopsided care, the boys turned out as different as night and day. Tom was honest and steady, a hard worker with a knack for fixing things. Jim, though, was sly and quick to scheme, always looking for an angle. That year, the town matchmaker, Widow Lou, came knocking with a marriage prospect. It was meant for Tom, the older brother, but Jim, used to grabbing what he wanted, talked Ma and Pa into giving it to him instead. Back then, tradition said the eldest married first, but Jim didn't care about rules. Ma and Pa, soft as ever on their favorite, caved and promised the match to him. The family wasn't rich, barely scraping by on their small farm, so marrying off two sons close together wasn't in the cards. The girl Widow Lou had lined up for Tom got handed over to Jim instead. Within 6 months, Jim's new wife was expecting. She had a rough go of it at first, couldn't keep a bite down, but after some doctoring, she started to mend. One winter, the snow came down thick and heavy, blanketing Springfield's outskirts like a quilt. Jim's wife, Mary, her name was, suddenly got a craving. "I'm starving," she said, rubbing her swollen belly. "I need rabbit stew." Trouble was, with all that snow, you couldn't spot a rabbit track to save your life. Where were they supposed to find fresh meat? But Mary wouldn't let it go. She had to have it, pregnant or not. Pa, desperate to keep her happy, turned to Tom. "Son, you're the best hunter we've got. Take your bow and see what you can rustle up." So Tom bundled up, grabbed his gear, and headed out with Pa into the swirling blizzard. Ma stayed behind with Jim to look after Mary. The two men trudged through the snow, splitting up to cover more ground. Tom searched high and low, but the rabbits must have been holed up tight. Hours passed, and he didn't find a thing. As dusk settled in, he started worrying. "Paul'll head home soon," he thought. "If he don't see me there, he'll fret." So Tom turned back, stumbling through the dark to the farmhouse. When he walked in, Ma was pacing, wringing her hands. "Tom, you're alone?" she asked, voice trembling. Tom nodded, catching his breath. "Pa ain't back yet?" Ma shook her head, eyes wide. Funny thing was, Jim and Mary didn't seem too fussed. Instead of rushing out to look for Pa, Jim just shrugged and said, "Tom, you're here now, keep an eye on Ma." Too tired to argue, Tom went straight to the town elder, Old Man Lee, and begged for help. Lee rounded up a dozen strong lads, and they scoured the hills all night. Nothing. Pa was gone, like he'd vanished into thin air. No tracks, no sign, no word ever again. Ma took it hard, her heart breaking day by day. She couldn't manage on her own, so the boys were supposed to take turns looking after her. Supposed to, mind you. In truth, it was all Tom. Jim always had an excuse: Mary's pregnancy, the baby coming soon, you name it. He'd dodge every chore while Tom picked up the slack. Fast forward a year, and Mary's little one was 6 months old, toddling around. One day, Jim and Mary sat Tom down. "Brother," Jim started, "we think it's time to split things up." Tom blinked, stunned. "Split what?" he asked. Mary piped up, "Look, you're a bachelor taking care of Ma all by yourself. It ain't right. Why don't you let us take her? We'll tend to her proper." Tom thought it over. It made some sense, so he nodded. Then Jim grinned, leaning in. "Let's divvy up the land, 2 fair and square, by head count. We've got 5 acres and 3 rooms in the house. There's 4 of us now, me, Mary, the kid, and Ma. That leaves you with 1 acre and a room. The house don't split even, so you'd be short a half room. Tell you what, we'll give you 1 full room and 1 fat acre. How's that sound?" Tom's blood simmered. It wasn't fair, not by a long shot, but he didn't want to tear the family apart over it. "Fine," he growled, jaw tight. Mary jumped in quick. "Now Tom, splitting up just means we'll handle Ma's daily needs. You're still her son. Stuff like doctor visits, new clothes, or anything big, we'll all pitch in together." Jim nodded along, all smiles. Those 2 were a pair of foxes, slick as you please, and they didn't even try to hide it. Tom didn't fight them. If they'll look after Ma right, he figured, I can swallow the rest. 1 measly acre wouldn't feed him, but he had his hands and his hunting skills. He'd make do. With less land to tend, he had more time to roam the hills. Every trip, whether he bagged much or not, he'd toss a little extra Jim's way, some meat, a pelt, whatever he could spare. When Jim's crops failed, Tom even pitched in with the field work. He knew Ma wasn't eating fancy over there, and Jim's thanks was rarer than a blue moon, but Tom kept at it, hoping Mary'd treat Ma kinder for it. One crisp fall day, the brothers went hunting together. With Tom's help, they hit the jackpot: rabbits, pheasants, even a fox. They were laughing, lugging their haul down the hill, when a wild squeal cut through the air. A boar, thrashing in some bushes up ahead. They crept closer and found it, a big sow, caught in a trapper's clamp, her back leg pinned tight. She was fighting hard but getting nowhere, grunting in pain. Funny thing though, when that boar spotted the brothers, she went still. Just lay there, staring at them with big wet eyes, like she was pleading, or waiting for them to decide her fate. Tom and Jim stood there, staring down at that trapped sow. She was a hefty one, her bristly hide scratched up from struggling, but her eyes, Lord, they were something else. Tom swore he saw tears glinting in them, like she was begging for mercy. Now Tom knew the rules. If an animal's caught in someone else's trap, it ain't yours to take. Fair's fair. But Jim? He didn't give a lick about that. Finders keepers, he said, grinning like a fox in a henhouse. Tom, you say 1 word about giving it back, and I'll fight you for the meat myself. Before Jim could draw his knife, Tom stepped in front of him. Hold up, Jim. We can't kill her. Look at those eyes. She's asking us to let her go. Jim snorted, rolling his eyes. You pulling my leg? Pigs don't cry, Tom. And even if she did, what's a few tears? You gonna set her free over that? Tom crouched down, peering closer. She's a mama pig, Jim. See that belly? She's got little ones on the way. If we let her go, we're saving more than just her. Jim laughed, loud and mean. What's it to you? Piglets are just more bacon down the line. You planning to marry her or something? Quit joking, Tom snapped, heat creeping up his neck. I'm serious. Killing her feels wrong. It's too cruel, wiping out a whole family like that. Jim smirked, leaning on his rifle. Oh, don't play the saint now. You just want her for yourself, don't you? Jealous, I'd get the haul. Fine, if you're so set on freeing her, I'll trade you all my share from today, rabbits, birds, the lot, for that sow. Deal. Tom hesitated. He knew Jim couldn't haul a boar that size down the hill alone. He'd need help either way. But Jim wasn't done. Tell you what, he added, rubbing his chin. Throw in $8 too. That's my price. $8. Back then, that could buy you a third of a hog outright. For folks like them, scratching by on pennies, it was a fortune. Tom's jaw dropped. You're crazy, he said. Jim shrugged. Take it or leave it. I'll butcher her right here, Sell her for 10 if I feel like it. Tom gritted his teeth. Fine. Deal. Jim's eyes lit up, though he tried to hide it with a fake grimace. Only doing this 'cause you're my brother, he muttered, sheathing his knife. I'm losing money here. Tom knelt by the sow. Her leg was a mess, torn bloody by the trap. He rummaged around for some yarrow growing wild nearby, chewed it into a paste, and ripped a strip from his shirt. Easy now, Mama, he said, patting her back. This'll sting, but I'm getting you out. With a grunt, he pried the trap open, wincing as the metal bit his hands. The sow flinched but didn't thrash. Quick as he could, Tom smeared the yarrow paste on her wound and wrapped it tight with the cloth. There you go, he said, standing. Rest up, and you'll be walking soon. The brothers turned to leave, hefting their game. Behind them, the sow watched, her heavy body hobbling off into the brush. If Tom didn't know better, he'd swear he saw 2 shiny tears roll down her snout. Next noon, Jim burst into Tom's shack, bawling like a baby. Tom. Ma, she's gone. Tom's heart stopped. Gone where? He choked out. Jim just sobbed harder. Tom bolted past him, sprinting to Ma's room at Jim's place. There she was, laid out on the bed, still as stone. He dropped to his knees, shaking her frail frame. Ma, you can't leave me without a word. As he helped dress her for burial, Tom noticed something awful. Ma was skin and bones, wasted away worse than he'd ever seen. Jim, he demanded, voice low, what happened? Jim stammered, dodging his eyes. She's been sick a while, Tom. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, course she got thin. Tom frowned. When he'd cared for her, Ma ate light but held her own, not like this. They'd only been split up a short spell. How'd she waste away so fast? Suspicion gnawed at him, but he shook it off. Jim's a selfish fool, he thought, but he wouldn't starve Ma. She loved him 10 times more than me when we were kids. I'm overthinking it. A week later, folks called it Widow's Night back then. They said the dead came home one last time. That night, Tom had a queer dream. Ma and Pa stood together, happy as could be, like they'd reunited out there beyond. Tom smiled in his sleep, glad for them, but then they turned to him, faces falling. We're sorry, Tom, Pa said. We always favored Jim, gave him too much, and we were wrong. We paid for it though, died unjustly, we did. Tom jolted awake, sweat beading on his brow. Died unjustly, he muttered. What's that mean? He lay there till dawn, puzzling it over, but no answer came. He chalked it up to a restless mind and let it go for a while. Those strange dreams kept haunting Tom. Night after night, Ma and Pa would show up, apologizing for favoring Jim, saying they died unjustly. Every time Tom tried to ask what they meant, he'd wake up, heart pounding, with no answers. He couldn't shake it, but with chores piling up, he pushed it aside. Just my head playing tricks, he told himself. One crisp fall day, Tom headed into the hills to hunt, crossing paths with Big Mouth Pete from town. Pete was a loud one, loved a good yarn and couldn't keep a secret if his life depended on it. They walked together, swapping stories, when Tom spotted a couple of pennies glinting in the dirt. He scooped them up, and Pete lit into him like he'd struck gold. Well, I'll be. Tom Miller's luck's turning today. You'll bag a heap of game, mark my words, maybe even hit it big down the line. Pete's blabbing didn't stay quiet long. By sundown, word reached Jim and Mary that Tom had found money. When Tom rolled into town, arms full of game, there they were, Jim, Mary, and their little tyke, waiting at the edge of the square. Jim waved like they were old pals, and the kid toddled over. Tom ruffled the boy's hair. Hey nephew, he said, I did good today. Here's a rabbit and 2 pheasants for you folks. Jim's ears perked up. Mary nudged him, whispering something fierce. They figured Pete was right. Tom must have struck it rich to be so generous. Jim sidled up, all sheepish. Say, Tom, Pete said you found silver. That true? Tom blinked, then laughed. Silver? Nah, don't listen to that fool. I ain't got that kind of luck. Just a couple pennies is all. But Jim and Mary weren't buying it. They saw Tom's easy giving and reckoned he was hiding a fortune, too stingy to share with kin. That night, they hatched a plan. Mary cooked up a feast, roast pheasant, rabbit stew, a jug of whiskey, while Jim set out extra plates. "Invite Tom over," Mary said. "Get him good and liquored up." Tom couldn't say no to a free meal. He showed up, and they poured it on thick, glass after glass, toasting family till Tom's head swam. He slumped over the table, out cold. Mary winked at Jim. "Now's our chance." Jim prodded him. "Tom? You awake?" But Tom didn't stir. Jim rummaged through his pockets, fishing out those 2 pennies. "That's it," he hissed. Mary rolled her eyes. "He's smarter than that. The real stash is at his place." They half-carried, half-dragged Tom home, dumped him on his cot, and tore the shack apart. Drawers yanked open, floorboards pried up, nothing but dust and those 2 cents. Just as they were stumped, Tom groaned and sat up bleary-eyed. Jim and Mary dove behind a crate, holding their breath. Tom staggered outside to the outhouse, muttering to himself. Out there, head spinning, he heard a voice, low and gruff. "Don't sleep in your bed tonight." Tom squinted into the dark. "Who's there?" "No bed, where am I supposed to sleep?" The voice came again, steady as stone. "It's me, the sow you saved. Listen to me, don't sleep in that bed." Tom froze, half sure he dreamed it. "A pig talking," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "No Boar, no nothing, just the wind." He shrugged it off as whiskey talking and stumbled back inside. Meanwhile, Jim and Mary crept out from hiding. "Wait a dang minute," Mary hissed. "We've searched everywhere but that bed he sleeps on." Jim slapped his forehead. "You're right, how'd I miss that?" They scurried over, Mary pawing the mattress, Jim ducking underneath. Sure enough, Mary's fingers hit something hard, a sack of what felt like coins, clinking like a jackpot. "Got it," she crowed, yanking it out. Dozens of shiny bits spilled into her hands, glinting in the moonlight. "Look at this, Jim, we're rich." Jim crawled out, gaping at the haul. "There's gotta be $50 here. Quick, let's skedaddle before he wakes up." Mary frowned. "Hold on. He'll notice this gone, know it was us. What then?" Jim scratched his head. "Can't leave half behind, that's no good." Mary leaned in, whispering low, and Jim's face twisted into a grin. Just then, Tom lurched back in, tripping over the threshold. Mary yelped, stumbling, and the sack slipped, crash. Coins hit the floor, ringing out like a bell. "Who's there?" Tom roared, squinting through the haze. Jim and Mary froze, then dropped to their knees, scrambling for the loot. Tom lunged, grabbing a rope off the wall. Drunk or not, he was quick, tied Jim up in a flash, then tackled Mary as she swung at him. She fought dirty, aiming for his ribs, but Tom's years of hunting paid off. After a tussle, he had them both trussed up tight. Panting, he lit a lantern. "You lousy thieves, breaking into a poor man's house at night? What's worth stealing here?" They didn't answer, heads bowed. Tom turned to chew them out, and froze. The light hit their faces. "Jim? Mary!" he gasped, legs buckling. He sank onto the bed, cold sweat beading down his back. "My own brother, what are you doing here?" Jim glared up, defiant. "Don't play dumb, Tom. You've been hoarding silver, stashing it away while we scrape by. Some brother you are." Tom's jaw dropped. "Silver? I ain't got no silver." He glanced at the floor where Jim pointed, and his breath caught. No coins, just a pile of smooth pebbles, thimble-sized, glowing faintly like fireflies. Tom stared at those glowing pebbles scattered across the floor, his mind racing. It clicked all at once, the fight, the silver Ma's wasting away. "This ain't what you think," he said, voice steady despite the whiskey still fogging his head. "I found money, sure, 2 lousy pennies. That's it." He reached for his pocket to prove it, but his hand came up empty. Jim and Mary ducked their heads, guilty as sin. Tom sighed. They'd already swiped the coins. "Rather believe Big Mouth Pete than your own brother," Tom muttered, shaking his head. "You invite me over, get me drunk, rummage through my place. Breaks my heart, Jim. When Ma and Pa were alive, they gave you everything, spoiled you rotten. You've been grabbing at what's mine since we were kids, and I never held it against you. They're gone now, and you're all I've got left. How could I hate you? If I did, I'd have fought you over Mary, the land, the game I shared. But I didn't. Jim and Mary sat there, tied up and silent, exchanging a look that said more than words ever could. The town clock struck 4 in the distance, early morning creeping in. Tom rubbed his eyes, bone-tired from the night's chaos. I'm beat, he said. Gonna lie down a spell. You two stay put, wake me at 5. Let this sink in for you. He blew out the lantern and climbed into bed. Jim's mouth opened, a panicked no on his lips, but Mary elbowed him hard, hissing, "Shut it." Tom squinted through the dark. What's wrong now? You got more to say. Mary forced a smile. Nothing, Tom. We're real sorry, honest. We'll call you at 5. Tom grunted, too worn out to dig deeper, and pulled the blanket over him. The second he hit the mattress, yelp! A sharp pain shot through his back. He rolled off, clutching at something sticky. Fumbling for the lantern, he lit it with shaky hands and looked. There, sticking out of the bed, was a gleaming dagger, its tip red with his blood. He yanked it free, heart hammering, and checked underneath. Sure enough, it had been wedged through the frame, hidden by the blanket, meant to kill him when he lay down. That sow's voice echoed in his head, "Don't sleep in that bed." She saved me, Tom whispered, piecing it together. He crawled under, pulled the dagger out, and stormed over to Jim and Mary, holding it up like a judge's gavel. This your silver, huh? They crumpled, trembling like leaves in a storm, begging for mercy. If they weren't roped up, they'd have been on their knees. Tom, please. Jim whimpered. We didn't mean it. Tom's face twisted, fury and hurt boiling over. He raised the dagger, and stopped an inch from Jim's chest. A puddle spread on the floor beneath them. One of them had lost their nerve entirely. I can't believe you'd sink this low, Tom spat. Trying to murder me? If it weren't for Ma and Pa's memory, I'd haul you to the sheriff right now. Mary was out cold, fainted dead away. Jim blubbered, I swear, Tom, never again, I swear it. Turns out, after they'd found the silver, Mary had whispered a wicked plan. If Tom figures out we took it, he'll come after us. Let's finish him. Stick a knife in his bed. He's drunk, he'll never know. Jim had rigged it up, sliding the blade through the slats while Tom was out back. They'd slipped up though, bumping into him on their way out, then tussling till the dagger loosened. When Tom flopped down, it only nicked him, not killed him. Tom glared at Jim, blade still in hand. Jim kept sobbing apologies, a broken mess. With a flick, Tom slashed the ropes, setting them free. Go home, he growled. Take care of that kid. I'm letting you off this time, for our folks, for the family we used to be. But cross me again, and I won't hold back. Jim's hair stood on end, sweat pouring off him. He barely stayed upright, shaking Mary awake. They clung to each other, hobbling out into the dawn like whipped dogs. That night, alone in their house, they sat up, staring at the walls. For once, they saw clear as day how wrong they'd been. Come morning, Jim and Mary showed up at Tom's door, dropping to their knees in the dirt. It's our fault, Jim said, voice cracking. We didn't take care of Ma right. She starved under our roof. We killed her, Tom. He slapped his own face, hard, left and right. Mary chimed in, tears streaming. It's on me too, Tom. I pushed him into it. Pa's death, Ma's. It's our doing. Punish us, please. Tom's eyes welled up. Ma and Pa's passing, I've got blame in that too, he said, voice thick. He pulled them up, and together they trudged to the family plot, confessing their sins at the graves. Back home, Jim and Mary brought food, grain, meat, whatever they had, tending to Tom's wound till it healed. Then Jim did right, split the house and land square down the middle, fair as could be. Mary even played matchmaker, finding Tom a sweet gal from town. From then on, the two families worked side by side, hunting, farming, living like kin ought to. Better than ever, some said. And that's the end of our first tale. Stick around for the next one. The man who pushed his plain wife into the river and the mother-in-law's warning about the shoes. Now folks, let's turn the page to our next tale. The man who pushed his plain wife into the river and the mother-in-law's warning about the shoes. Way out in Hopewell, a dusty little speck of a town in Kansas, lived a fella named Will Thompson and his ma, Widow Ellie. Will was a carpenter by trade, not cause he'd apprenticed young, mind you, but cause life left him no choice. Day in, day out, He hammered together coffins and furniture for the townsfolk, scraping by on whatever they'd toss his way. The Thompsons hadn't always been hard up. Back in the day, they were a solid family. Will's pa had a knack for numbers, and they'd owned a tidy plot with a big house. Will himself was a bookish sort, nose always in a ledger, dreaming of clerking for the county or maybe even running for office someday. But fate's a fickle thing. Pa passed sudden-like, and Ma took sick soon after, hit hard by the loss. Will's studying days dried up fast. Between doctor bills and bad harvests, the family fortune slipped through their fingers like sand. By the time Ma's cough turned chronic, Will was swinging a hammer instead of a pen. One morning, Will was spooning broth into Ma's mouth, her frail hands trembling on the quilt. "Will, honey," she rasped, "I ain't got much time left. You gotta promise me something." Will's heart sank. "Ma, don't talk like that. Whatever you want, I've always listened, except this. I can't promise to let you go." Ellie coughed, a deep, rattling sound, and Will panicked. "All right, Ma, don't get riled. I promise, just tell me." She settled back, eyes sharp despite her weariness. "Good boy. I found you a wife, Jenny Lane, from the next town over. She's a fine girl, Will. She'll take care of you when I'm gone." Will's shoulders slumped, but he nodded. "If you say so, Ma. I trust you." See, the Thompsons used to rub elbows with the well-to-do, back when Pa was alive. But after he died, Ellie couldn't shake her grief, and sickness took root. Will had been a bright kid, hanging with the sons of merchants, sipping whiskey in saloons, chasing big ideas. When Ma fell ill, he burned through their savings on tonics and doctors, 2 years of it, till the bank took the house. Left with nothing, he picked up carpentry to keep them fed. Even broke, Will still carried himself like a scholar, proud head high, dreaming of a wife with looks to match his old ambitions. But Hopewell's finer families wouldn't hitch their daughters to a fallen man like him. Ellie had begged the town matchmaker, Widow Rose, to find someone, anyone, who'd take Will as he was. Only one girl didn't turn up her nose, Jenny Lane, daughter of a fisherman from Cedar Creek. She was hard-working and kind, but plain as a fence post, face scarred up from smallpox, not a beauty by any stretch. When Will heard Ma's pick, he balked. "A pock-marked girl," he grumbled. He dodged it for months, but seeing Ma so frail now, he couldn't bear to upset her. "Fine," he sighed. "I'll marry her." Under Ellie's watchful eye, the wedding was set quick. The day after Will and Jenny tied the knot, Ellie called him into her room, voice barely a whisper. "Will, listen. Jenny's good stock, she'll stick by you. Don't you dare mistreat her, or I'll haunt you from the grave." Will squeezed her hand. "Don't worry, Ma. She's my wife now, I'll treat her right, always." Ellie smiled, a rare flicker of peace, and a few days later, she slipped away quiet-like in her sleep. Will mourned hard, tears streaking his face for days. Jenny stepped up, handling the burial and keeping the house in order, all without a word of complaint. She was a steady hand, cleaned, cooked, patched clothes, like she'd been born to it. A month on, one night as they sat by the fire, Will turned to her. "Jenny," he said, "I'm thinking of getting back to my books. Maybe study law, make something of myself. If I can climb up, I'll give you a better life. What do you reckon?" Jenny looked at him, eyes soft. "Will, if that's your dream, go for it. I believe in you, you'll make it big. I'll hold things down here." So Will dusted off his old ledgers, burning the midnight oil, while Jenny took on sewing jobs and sold fish traps to keep food on the table. She bustled from dawn to dusk, making sure Will never went hungry, all to see him chase that spark he'd lost. With Jenny's blessing, Will threw himself into his books, poring over law texts by lamplight while the cold Kansas wind rattled the windows. He quit carpentry altogether, trusting Jenny to keep them afloat. She stitched shirts for the neighbors, wove fish traps to sell down by Cedar Creek, and hauled water, anything to put grub on the table. She'd cook Will's meals right on time, making sure he never missed a bite while he studied. Her hard work paid off. With folks pitching in, some lending old law books, others slipping her extra sewing, Will hit the books like a man possessed. Sure enough, he passed the bar exam down in Topeka, earning himself a license to practice law. Suddenly, Will Thompson wasn't just the coffin maker's son, he was a bona fide attorney. Word spread fast in Hopewell, and folks who'd snubbed him before came knocking, eager to cozy up now that he had prospects. A lawyer could climb high, maybe even land a judge's seat someday. One day, an old buddy, Sam Tucker, swung by with an invite. "Will, come wet your whistle at the Golden Saloon, my treat." Will showed up, and who should be there but Charlie Lane, no relation to Jenny, a slick-talking fella he'd run with back in his wild days. When the Thompsons had money, Will, Sam, and Charlie were thick as thieves, drinking, gambling, chasing skirts in the rowdy parts of town. After the family fell on hard times, Sam had cut Will loose, but Charlie still dropped by now and then. Will settled into a chair, and Sam clapped his hands. Out sashayed a gal, Lola May, all curves and charm, every step a tease. She slid right up to Will, plopping into his lap like she owned it. Will blinked, flustered. "Sam, what's this about?" Sam grinned wide. "Meet Lola May, Will. She's a looker, ain't she? Comes from good stock, too. I reckon only a sharp fella like you deserves her. Take her as a gift, my way of saying congrats on the law gig." Will's heart skipped, Lola's perfume clouding his head. But then he thought of Jenny, toiling back home, and frowned. "Thanks, Sam, but I've got a wife already." Before he could finish, Sam leaned in close, whispering something low and sly. Will's frown melted, and he raised his glass. "Well, Sam, that's a mighty fine plan. Let's drink to it, no going home sober tonight." The three of them, Will, Sam, and Charlie, tore through the whiskey, laughing loud. Will's eyes kept drifting to Lola, her smile pulling him in. By the time the saloon spun, Sam clapped him on the shoulder. "Will, I'm tapped out, gotta head home. Lola'll see you back safe. Catch you another day." Will, slurring and grinning, grabbed her arm. "Sam, you old dog, you know me too well. I'm 3 sheets to the wind. Me and Lola'll stumble on home." They staggered out, Sam and Charlie trailing behind. Right outside, Will tripped over his own boots, sprawling in the dirt. Just then, Jenny rolled by with a cart of fish traps, headed home from a late sale. She dropped it quick and rushed over. "Will, you all right? How'd you get so liquored up? Come on, I'll get you home." Will shoved her off, slurring, "Get lost, woman. Who are you?" "I'm Will Thompson, big shot lawyer. Some fish-stinking gal ain't gonna drag me around." Jenny flinched. "Will, it's me, Jenny. You're drunk, that's all. Let me help." He roared, "I don't care if you're Jenny or the Queen of England. Hands off, this gentleman's walking home alone." He lurched off, leaving her standing there. Sam sneered from the sidelines, pinching his nose. "Ugh, you reek of river muck, lady. Push that cart of yours out of here, stinking up the street." He grabbed Lola and strutted off, leaving Jenny alone, head bowed. Back home, Will sobered up enough to mumble an apology. "Jenny, tonight was a mess, I didn't mean it. You know I'm climbing up now. If folks find out my wife's a plain fish trap girl, it'll drag me down. You get that, right?" Jenny nodded, quiet. "I ain't mad, Will. It's my fault, making you look bad. Should I quit the traps?" "Nope," Will snapped. "We'd starve without him. Keep at it. Oh, heard there's a dock across Plum River, real good with cures. Might help you have a kid. How's that sound?" Jenny perked up. "If he's that good, let's go tomorrow." Plum River was a beast, 20 yards wide, current tearing through, wind howling year-round. Jagged rocks poked up like teeth, even the best fishermen steered clear. One slip, and you were done for. Next morning, Will and Jenny stood on the bank, watching a few old anglers cast lines. Will turned to her. "Let's rent a boat, row ourselves over. Look at this place, pretty as a picture. You work so hard, Jenny, I owe you a nice day out, just us. What do you say?" Her eyes softened. "Will, that's sweet. I'd love it." They waited till a grizzled fisherman, old Hank, rowed in. Will haggled a spell, and Hank rented them his skiff. As they climbed aboard, Hank hollered, "Listen here, if the wind kicks up halfway, turn back. Don't push it." Jenny thanked him, and Will shoved off, oars creaking. They glided toward the middle, water lapping gentle. "Jenny," Will said, "sit up on the edge, heard it's comfier that way. Go on, it's calm today." Jenny, fisherman's daughter, knew boats well enough. She perched on the gunwale, breeze cooling her face, smiling soft. Right then, with her back turned, Will braced his feet, and shoved. She splashed into the churning river, flailing as the current yanked her down. Will didn't blink, just rowed back to shore, leaving her to sink. Back in Hopewell, he wailed to anyone who'd listen, "My wife fell in Plum River, gone body and all. I'll never marry again, I swear." His crocodile tears worked like a charm. Word reached the county judge, who reckoned Will a loyal, heartbroken man, and a lawyer to boot. Soon enough, he got tapped as Hopewell's new magistrate. Will Thompson settled into his magistrate gig in Hopewell like a king on a throne. Folks tipped their hats now, calling him Judge Will, and his old pal Sam Tucker was tighter with him than ever. Most nights, Will was over at Sam's place, knocking back whiskey and swapping tall tales. One afternoon, after a long pour at Sam's, Will was strolling back to the courthouse, still buzzing from the liquor. Out of nowhere, a woman trundled by with a cart of dried fish, smelled like river mud and hard work. As she passed, she leaned in close and whispered, "Tonight, don't take your shoes off when you sleep, keep 'em on." Before Will could blink, she shoved her cart off, vanishing into the dusk. He scratched his head, half sure he'd misheard through the whiskey haze. That evening, Will was hunched over case files in his courthouse office, Lola May draped around him like a shawl. "Will, honey," she purred, "I've been with you a spell now. When you gonna make me your wife? Give me a proper name." Will set his papers down, pulling her into his lap. "Lola, I can't marry you, and I can't give you a title neither. But I'll give you what I can, money, a place to stay. See, I owe Sam big time. His clever scheme got me this judge seat. Marrying you'd stir up trouble, folks'd call it bigamy, and I'd be sunk." Lola pouted but didn't push. "Fine then. Let's call it a night, I'll get you out of that coat." Will nodded. "Yeah, it's late. Let's rest." He stood waiting for her to unbutton him, when that fishwoman's words pinged in his head, "Don't take your shoes off." He froze, then waved Lola off. "Hold up, I just remembered, got some papers to finish. I'll sleep in the study tonight. You rest here, good night." He bolted out, leaving her blinking in the lamplight. Around 3 in the morning, Will was nodding over his desk when a shadow flickered outside. He cracked the door and peeked. There was Lola, creeping through the garden in her nightgown, heading for a fellow waiting in the dark. The man tossed back his hood, and it was Sam Tucker. Sam pulled her close. "Did Will bite? You push him to marry you, or kill him yet?" Lola sighed, leaning into him. "No dice. He's cagey, sleeps in the same room but won't touch me, won't set a date. I tried slipping a knife under his pillow tonight, figuring he'd roll over it in his sleep, but he's holed up in the study now. I don't know, he's onto something." Sam frowned. "We gotta tie him to us tighter. He's useful as magistrate, keeps the law off our backs. If he's sniffing around, we'll pin him with something big, make him a scapegoat if we have to. Sheriff Tate's been breathing down my neck about those cattle deals." Will ducked back, ears burning. It all clicked. Sam and Lola were playing him, and he'd been too blind to see it. He wanted to hear more, but they were already splitting up, Lola heading his way. He slipped out fast, heart thumping, and hid in the shadows. Next morning, Will was eating breakfast at home when Sheriff Tate busted in with a posse, cuffs in hand. "Will Thompson, you're under arrest." They tore the place apart, pulling out forged deeds, a stash of gold bars and letters, proof he'd been selling secrets to a gang of rustlers out west. Will's jaw dropped, but before he could argue, they hauled him to the jailhouse. Word was, he'd face the gallows in a few days. That night, locked in a cell, Will slumped against the wall. Footsteps echoed, and Sam Tucker strolled up with Sheriff Tate, both smirking. Sam crouched low, voice dripping with glee. "Will, old buddy, I warned you, knew you'd catch on eventually. Why'd you have to be so stubborn? Smart fellas picked the winning side. My family's been running this game for years. Crooked deals, greased palms. You're just a bookworm who don't get it." Will glared through the bars. "Sam, my kin were honest folk. Pa worked clean his whole life. You think I'd turn traitor for you? Dream on." Tate stepped up, all business. "I get it, Will. Your family's upright, honorable. Here's your shot, roll over, pin this on someone else, and I'll talk to the governor. Say you were framed, get you sprung. You'll keep your judge seat. What do you say?" Will's eyes blazed. "Long as I've got breath, I won't sell out Kansas, or this country. You're dreaming if you think I'd join your filth. Tate's face darkened. Fine. You wanna play martyr? Rot here then. He turned to the guards. Take him out back, finish it. Just then a voice boomed, hold it right there. Traitors in my territory, selling out good folks. Governor Hayes stormed in, flanked by his deputy, Jack Riley, and a squad of troopers. Riley grabbed these snakes. Sam and Tate spun, mouths flapping for excuses, but Hayes cut him off. Shut it, I heard every word. You think I'm deaf? The troopers wrestled them down, cuffs clanking. Riley unlocked Will's cell. Sorry you went through this, Will. You did right by us. Will shook his head. No trouble, Jack, just doing my duty. He started to kneel for Hayes, but the governor stopped him. None of that, Will. You're a good man. Head outside, someone's waiting. Will thanked him and stepped out. There by the jailhouse door stood Charlie Lane, and Jenny plain as ever, eyes shining with relief. Time to go home, Will said, clapping Charlie on the shoulder. Come along, let's have a drink. Turns out, everything Will pulled, the drinking, the push into Plum River, the cozying up to Sam, was a long con, a play to root out the real crooks in Hopewell. See, Jack Riley, the governor's deputy, was an old friend of Will's pa. Years back, Jack sniffed out a ring of rustlers and land grabbers working the territory, and he'd been chasing leads ever since. When he found Sam Tucker tangled up in it, he needed an inside man. Will fit the bill, Sam's old pal, newly minted lawyer, and sharp as a tack. Jack tracked down Will and Charlie Lane, laying it out plain. We gotta draw Sam out, catch the big fish behind him. Will agreed, but it'd take some acting. Charlie went to Sam, spinning a yarn about Will's ambitions, how a big-shot lawyer could use a friend like Sam to climb higher. Sam bit, figuring he'd rope Will into his schemes, maybe even split the profits. More hands on deck never hurt a crook. That day at Plum River, all staged. Will knew Sam's boys were watching, itching to trust him. He'd tipped Jenny off beforehand, whispering the plan over supper. She'd play the scorned wife, take the fall, literally, and he'd sell it hard. Jenny, fisherman's daughter, could swim like an otter. Will picked a spot near a tangle of reeds. When he shoved her in, she thrashed a bit for show, then ducked under, drifting to safety. Her pa rowed out quiet like in a skiff and fished her out, slick as you please. To keep the ruse tight, Jenny laid low, dolling herself up rough, smudged face, ragged clothes, carting fish like a drifter. She slipped into Sam's orbit, eavesdropping where she could. One night, she overheard Sam plotting to ditch Charlie, said he knew too much about the rustling. Jenny tipped Will, who passed it to Jack and Charlie. They cooked up a fix. Charlie'd wear a trick sleeve with a steel dart, stage a fall off a cliff when Sam's spies were near. He tumbled, hid, and waited him out, then snuck off clean. Will sent the town posse up the hill after, playing the worried magistrate to seal the lie. Charlie was dead. That night with the shoes? Jenny'd caught wind of Lola and Sam's latest move, pin Will with a murder rap or worse. She slipped him the warning by the courthouse, knowing he'd catch the hint. Sure enough, it kept him out of bed and sharp enough to overhear their scheming. Days later, the trap snapped shut. Jack had all he needed, forged deeds planted in Will's house, gold stashed by Sam's crew, phony letters cooked up to frame him. When Sheriff Tate hauled Will in, it was just the bait. Sam and Tate strutted into that jail, spilling their guts right where Jack and Governor Hayes could hear. The governor swooped in, nabbed the pair, and the truth came tumbling out. Sam and Tate got the noose quick and legal, while Lola was shipped off to a work camp out west. Hayes took a shine to Will's grit. Not long after, he bumped him up to sheriff, replacing Tate with a man he could trust. Will settled back into Hopewell, Jenny at his side, and life turned sweet. Before you knew it, she gave him a son, little Jake Thompson, strong and squalling. They lived happy, raising crops and cattle, a family tighter than a barrel's hoops. Folks round these parts still tell that tale, passing down an old saying, a plain wife's worth keeping, for she's the treasure in your house. Will might have married Jenny out of duty, but he stuck by her true. Even with Lola dangling in his face, he stayed clean, heart steady. Sam thought he was the fox, outsmarting everyone, but he didn't see the snare, played himself right into ruin. Ain't that a lesson? When you're broke, don't fuss over who you wed. When you're flush, Don't toss her aside. The loudmouths strut and stumble, but the quiet ones, the real sharp ones, win out in the end. That's the story, folks, plain and simple. If you liked this yarn, drop a holler below. Don't forget to spread the word. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time with another tale.